Hello guys, just give me a second to get set up here and then I will be with you very shortly. Okay, whilst I'm getting set up, why don't you guys leave me a comment, let me know how you're doing, how you've done this week, how this week has gone, especially now that we are kind of moving back towards a stricter movement control order. Yeah, so now that we're moving back towards a more strict movement control order, let me know how you guys are feeling about it. You know, if any feelings of like anxiety and stuff are coming up. Just gonna wait for a little while for more people to join us, for a couple of seconds for more people to join us before I get really started on today's sharing. I see people watching, so leave me a comment to say hi and to let me know where you are watching from. How's this week been? This week has been very tiring. I came in this morning, sorry it's a bit noisy, I came in this morning and there was something on my desk that I had ordered from Vaja Secrets, and it's in this bag, and it is actually this. So I ordered this 4 days ago. It's called Gurus for Higher Enlightenment for Sale, and it's a book that was composed by Rinpoche, and Rinpoche had given a very extensive teaching on it. So this book came out as a result of that, and we've been going through the book for our weekly blog discussions that we have for the residents here, and it's been very good. So it's taken us a little while to get through the first 3 or 4 pages because of a lot of discussion that takes place from the material that we read. But yeah, so that's what I did this week. Good morning, Nick San Tan. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And hello, Sukfan. Hi. I hope everything's going well, has gone well this week. So I know, Pastor Shin, I hope we don't go into lockdown again, but if we do, I have my hand sanitizer and my mask ready. But yeah, I hope that we don't go back into lockdown again. It's kind of worrying, you know, that as soon as everything sort of relaxed, how quickly we fell back into old habits, and watching the cases on the rise again. So I'm kind of happy in the sense that, you know, the authorities have reacted so quickly by moving to enforce the SOPs more strictly. But hopefully everyone kind of abides by it so that we don't have to go back into lockdown again. Good morning, Limman. Thank you for joining me this morning. And good morning, Pastor Antoinette. I hope you're feeling better. I am so sorry that you weren't able to join our durian feast the other day. Okay, so today I will be talking about rejection. But before I start, I'm going to do a prayer to ascribe the source of the teachings, the source of the information that will be shared today. I go for refuge in my Lama, from whom I've received these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage Lamas, from whom my Lama has received these teachings. All right, so do I need to introduce myself? Hi, my name is Pastor Jinai. Hope everyone's doing okay this week. And short, quick recap. Last week I talked about anxiety, and talked about what anxiety is and how to break the cycle of projecting fearful thoughts into an uncertain future. And I talked about how to deal with anxiety when we recognize it, not just in ourselves, but in other people as well. So I talked about dealing with it with compassion, with patience, and with gentleness. And this week, I'm going to talk about something that I've touched on briefly, many times actually, in the previous weeks. But before I go into that, I just wanted to say that if you guys have any questions or special requests for topics, specific topics to be covered please let me know. Leave me a message in the comment section below this video, or above this video, or to the side of this video, depending on where you're watching it, and I will try and cover that in a future video for you. And also, before I get into things today, today's talk is sponsored by Iman, with the dedication, "May all suffering quickly cease, and all joy and happiness be fulfilled, and the holy Dharma flourish forevermore." And today's talk is also sponsored by Andrew Tan. So thank you guys very much for your sponsorship and for your continued support of these online programs. If you'd like to sponsor a talk, there is a link in the description section of this video. Please click on it, because your support helps us to continue to make these online programs and sharings and teachings available. All right, so rejection. I have talked about this quite a lot in previous weeks. And actually, it's also something that Rinpoche addressed quite often. A specific example of when Rinpoche usually talked about or raised the topic of rejection was actually in the aspect of fundraising. So Rinpoche talked about how fundraising is the perfect practice for people who have trouble dealing with rejection and need more practice in it. All right, because when you do fundraising, people will keep saying no to you over and over again. So they'll keep doing that until one day you say yes, until they say yes, until you get a yes. So if you guys have trouble dealing with rejection, just to let you know, fundraising is a very good way of getting some practice in. So what is rejection? I don't think I actually need to really define rejection for you guys. So instead of going straight to talking about that, I'm going to talk and ask you guys how you feel when you experience rejection, and when was the last time you experienced rejection, and how did that make you feel? So perhaps some people are not all that comfortable with sharing personal experiences. So just to get the ball rolling, to get started, I'll talk about my own experiences with rejection. I know that when I experience rejection over and over again, I know that my tendency is to feel down. My tendency is to think of it as a reflection of my self-worth. And I know that instantly I think that when somebody rejects me, it is a statement, or it is a reflection of how people see me. And I know that's my habit, and I know that's my tendency. So when I talk about rejection, I'm not saying it from a theoretical point of view. I'm saying it as a very real experience that I go through. Everyone goes through. All right. Sorry, the reason why I keep looking to the right is because I can see myself in video and thinking, oh my god, my hair is so long, so I'm going to go for a haircut after this. Okay, but anyway, that is how I react, or how I experience, or my tendency to react when I experience rejection. And but that's rejection of me. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a few different types, or a few different ways all of us experience rejection, right? Not just rejection of ourselves. And I'm not talking about, when I talk about rejection, I'm not talking about rejection of things like consumerism. I'm not talking about rejection of desire, or I'm not talking about renunciation or rejection of attachment or anything like that. I'm talking about outright rejection. So rejection that we ourselves enact, or we ourselves perform, which I've talked about a lot in previous weeks, how we reject things and the consequences of that, and the harmful effect that it can have on us and on our learning, and the habits that we develop as a result of rejection all the time. So I'm not going to go into that too much. I'm also going to talk about rejection that we experience from others. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to talk about the rejection that we direct to ourselves. So putting ourselves down and making ourselves feel small. And this goes into the topic of self-worth, which I know many people struggle with. So that is a whole separate other topic which we can go into more in depth. So I'm going to cover that in a future video. I'm not going to cover that so much today. All right, so what happens when we're rejected? And some of the emotions I've talked about in the past that have arisen as a result of us experiencing rejection include anger. So sometimes people react very angrily when they experience rejection. Some people react with frustration, and as a result of being perhaps unable to verbalize or express their frustration, it comes out as anger. Sometimes people react to rejection by experiencing bitterness. Sometimes people react to rejection by experiencing guilt. So thinking that, I'm so unworthy of having fun, and so because I'm so unworthy of having fun, people start to reject new experiences. Sometimes people enact or perform an act of rejection because of disappointment that they felt in the past, right? So rejection can result in disappointment, and it can also arise as a result of disappointment. So I might disappoint someone else, or I might disappoint myself. So I'm going to avoid and I'm going to reject new situations so that I don't have to experience further disappointment. Sometimes people might engage in rejection as a result of anxiety. So if I enter into a new experience, or I enter into a new interaction, or I enter into a new situation, I'm not going to be able to handle it. And so as a result of anxiety, I'm going to reject getting involved in all these new experiences. And as I mentioned in the talk about anxiety, in the sharing about anxiety, it can be paralyzing, right? So it can paralyze us and prevent us from pushing our comfort zones, and prevents us from exposing ourselves to new situations, which might compel us to change and compel us to improve. All right, so there's more comments. I didn't see the comments. See, Facebook's really weird. I don't really understand how it works, right? People leave comments and it doesn't actually scroll down. But anyway, good morning, David. Good morning, Karen or Corinne. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Good morning, Penny. Good morning, Kok Yen. And good morning, Phoebe. And Xiao Gua, if he's there. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. So, what happens when we experience rejection? We can experience anger, frustration, bitterness as a result of it. We can experience guilt or disappointment. We can experience anxiety, or because of guilt, disappointment, anxiety, and things like that, we can perform an act of rejection or engage in rejection. We might also experience jealousy as a result of experiencing rejection. So, for example, being rejected from a job, or being rejected from a promotion, and then seeing your colleague get it. Jealousy can arise as a result. Or as I mentioned before, we can experience low self-worth or low self-esteem. So thinking that someone rejecting us is a statement or reflection of their belief or what they think about us. All right, so as you can see, there are a lot of emotional reactions that can arise as a result of rejection, or can lead to an act of rejection. And so it will be very, very helpful for us to understand how to deal with rejection, and how to navigate it, and how to approach it, what kind of attitude we can cultivate and develop to approach rejection. All right, so think back to some of the times when you have experienced rejection and how you felt. For example, myself, one of the most consistent experiences of rejection that I went through was during 2009. Did I? Yeah, sorry, so long ago, when I first graduated from university, at the end of in the middle of 2009. So if you guys remember, that was like smack in the middle of the financial crisis, right? So there was a lot of retrenchment going on, and there were a lot of hiring freezes. And I was in England at the time, so I was an international student. I didn't have a work visa. I would have to rely on the employer getting me a work visa. So obviously it made me on the lower end of the desirability spectrum for new job hires, especially in such a difficult job market. So I think I applied to like 200 jobs, and I got like 2 interviews. So that was a very consistent experience of being rejected over and over again. But how did I feel about it? It was, Corinne, is that correct? And good morning, Bradley. So yeah, so that was that period was a very, very prolonged and extended period of experiencing rejection. And how did I feel about it? At the beginning, I was like, it's fine, because it's at the beginning, right? You think you can handle it, and then towards the middle, it was kind of like, oh wow, reality kind of set in. And then towards the end, I was thinking, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Did I just waste 3 years of my life doing a degree, and I'm unemployable? So, there was a whole roller coaster of emotions, but that's how I felt. during that time of rejection. So if you guys feel comfortable, do share in the comment section, thinking back to some of the times when you have experienced rejection, how did you feel? And also think, how come some rejections hurt more than others? How come some rejections have more impact on you than others? So, for example, in 2004, when I was applying for university, jeez, that's 16 years ago. Anyway, in 2004, when I was applying for university, I applied to England. And as per the standard, I applied to 6 universities. You have to state your preference, and then you got to state your safety net. I think that's what it's called. So, as usual, as most of the kids around me did, I stated my first choice being Cambridge. And I went for the interview, and I got rejected. Now, the funny thing is that being rejected from Cambridge hurt way less than I expected it to, because it wasn't really my first choice. I did it out of a sense of obligation that, you should put Cambridge as your first choice. For me, if I had been rejected from my actual first choice, it would have been far more devastating for me, right? So that's the funny thing. Some rejections actually hurt more than others. And so when you think about it, when you think about why some rejections hurt more than others, it's because there are some things that you cling to more than other things, and there's some things that you desire more than other things, and there's some things that you're more attached to than other things. So for me, in my case, Cambridge, I wasn't that attached to, but there was a actual choice that I was very, very, that I really, really, really wanted. And so if I had been rejected from that, it would have been far more devastating to me than it would have been for me to have been rejected from Cambridge. So when you think about that, think, why is it that some rejections hurt more than others? And do the things that you're rejected from have any inherent value in and of themselves beyond what you project onto them? What is the value of going to Cambridge beyond prestige, or beyond becoming more desirable to the job market, for example? Going to that place, is there any value to it if you yourself don't project value onto it? In my case, I didn't project value onto it, I projected value into something else. So the rejection from Cambridge hurt less than the rejection I would have experienced from my actual first choice. If I had gotten into Cambridge, would it have been the right place for me? What am I actually feeling the pain of? Am I feeling the pain of, is it logical for me to feel pain from being rejected by something that wasn't mine to begin with? And is it logical for me to feel pain from being rejected by something that has no inherent value in it to begin with? All right, so how do you know it has no inherent value? You know that an experience has no inherent value, or you know an object or a subject that you're being rejected from has no inherent value because of different people and how they would react differently to it. So for someone who highly values an experience in Cambridge or studying in Cambridge, a rejection from Cambridge would have been far more devastating to them than it would have been, or than it was to me, right? So you know that the experience in and of itself has no inherent value beyond what I projected onto it, beyond what someone else would project onto it. All right. So now that we've talked about that, what happens then? What happened then when I was rejected? Someone who actually values it, they would have spent many, many more days feeling very hurt, feeling very devastated. I think my parents would not be happy to hear about this, but the pain lasted for me about a day. And then I very, very quickly got over it, because I realized that actually that wasn't where I wanted to be. And I think maybe the interviewer sensed that wasn't where I really wanted to be. So it wouldn't have been a good fit anyway. But what happens when you're involved in rejection? What happens when you're involved as a recipient of it, or someone who performs an act of rejection? And I'm going to talk about it good morning, Jillian. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you guys all joining me after JP's Mindful Morning meditation session. You guys had a good session this morning. But yeah, what happens when you're involved in rejection? So I'm going to talk about it kind of back to front, because usually we talk about it from a secular perspective first, and then we talk into spiritual. But excuse me. Spiritually speaking, when you're involved in rejection, either as a recipient or as a performer of it, it's very hard to progress. Why is it hard to progress? Because if you reject parts of other people, it doesn't make sense then every day for us to sit and do our prayers and sit and do our meditations and then pray for the welfare of all sentient beings. Because you're not praying for the entire welfare of all sentient beings. You're not praying for a holistic approach to all sentient beings. You're praying, oh, I might pray to this part of this sentient being, I might pray to that sentient being because I have, I accept them. I might pray to that sentient being because I like them, I can tolerate them, I agree with them, but I don't pray to this person, I don't pray to that person, and I won't pray for that part of that person because you reject that person. Right? So it doesn't make sense, spiritually speaking, to reject parts of other people, or to reject people, because every single day we're sitting down, we're trying to cultivate compassion for all sentient beings without exception. And if you think about it, if you think about the state or the existence or the level of mind that we're trying to transcend to and we're trying to progress to, we're trying to progress to the ultimate goal of enlightenment. We're trying to progress and we're trying to develop ourselves to become Buddhas. Now, think about it. Has there ever been any Buddha in any single point of history who has rejected anyone? Right? So no enlightened mind rejects anyone at all. A truly enlightened mind doesn't see a difference between that person and themselves. So no Buddha in the history of time has ever rejected anyone. And if you talk about, let's say, just going straight back to the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha rejected no one, because ultimately everyone is and everyone wants the same thing. Everybody wants to be happy, everybody doesn't want to suffer. But how we actually get there and how we actually get to that state of no suffering and happiness, and the paths that we opt for, the paths that we choose, the path that suits us the most, that will differ. But ultimately everybody wants the same thing. And so since ultimately everybody wants the same thing, and ultimately everybody is their Buddha potential, their potential to become enlightened, there is no difference between any of us. And so if you look at Buddhas, if you look at the Buddha, Lord Shakyamuni, Buddhas never reject anyone. Alright, so rejecting someone automatically already sets up a kind of roadblock or obstacle in our spiritual progress. Alright, and if you reject parts of yourself, you're talking about it from a very spiritual point of view. If you reject parts of yourself, what you're actually doing is you're rejecting your potential. So when you keep beating yourself up and you keep putting yourself down, what you're doing is you're actually blocking and rejecting your potential. Whether it's your potential to become enlightened, and if that's your goal, so let's say your goal is to become enlightened, so you're blocking either your potential to become enlightened, or you are blocking simply just your potential to become happier, your potential to become lighter, your potential to improve yourself, or your potential to be less governed by fear, less governed by anxiety and so on. Alright, so when you reject parts of yourself and you put yourself down, what you're doing is you're actually blocking your potential and rejecting your potential to become lighter, to become happier, and to become more liberated. Or if it suits you, you're rejecting your potential to become enlightened, because no Buddha ever rejected any part of themselves. So think about that, alright? Put that in your mind. Now, on a secular level, when you're talking about on a secular level, if you're talking about what happens when you're involved in rejection, either as a recipient or as a performer of rejection, when you reject parts of others, it's very, very simple, very, very straightforward. When you reject parts of other people, you're setting yourself up for loneliness. Why? Who's perfect? Who has opinions that we don't agree with? Who has made decisions that we don't agree with? And on the flip side, conversely, have we ever made decisions that other people didn't agree with? Are there parts of ourselves, are there opinions that we hold that other people don't agree with? And so if we engage in rejection and we reject other people, or we reject parts of other people, we're setting ourselves up, or we're setting the stage for ourselves to experience loneliness in the future. Because in a very, very mundane, basic level, it becomes very hard to make friends when you reject other people and when you have issues accepting people in spite of their differences, in spite of your differences between yourself and them. All right, so it's a recipe for loneliness, because if you keep rejecting people because of something they've said or something they've done that you don't agree with, I mean, very straightforward, very logically speaking, sooner or later, you're going to end up rejecting everybody. You set yourself up to reject everyone, and you set yourself up to develop a habit or a tendency of rejecting or reacting with rejection as soon as you come across something that you do not like or you do not agree with. All right? And secularly speaking, if you hate or you reject parts of yourself, you're going to have a hard time trusting that other people can love you, that other people can accept you, and that other people want to be with you. How can you're going to start thinking, how can someone love somebody who is imperfect or who has all of these flaws? So, I've seen a lot of these memes floating around, and a lot of these, self-help, sort of spiritual transgression type sharings online. And it's true, if you think about it, realize that how you see yourself very oftentimes is not how other people see you. Our view of ourselves can either be very, very positive, so erring on the extremely positive side. So some people think that their farts don't smell, and that they're always pooping rainbows, and they are the bomb, to use a very outdated expression. But some people have a very extreme positive view of themselves, which does not necessarily match reality. So it does not necessarily match how other people view them. Other people have on the other end of the spectrum, other people have a very extremely negative view of themselves. So they think very, very lowly of themselves, and they do not think that they are worth anything. So that's people on the other end of the spectrum. But oftentimes, when people have this very negative view of themselves, you can also observe that this negative view of themselves does not match the view of themselves that other people have of them. Conversely, which is the case for most of us, we oscillate between the two. So in certain situations, we have very, very high regard for ourselves, and in other situations, we don't think very much of ourselves. So you can see from your own experience that oftentimes your view of yourself doesn't match how other people view you. So if you are someone who experiences low self-worth or low self-esteem, think about that. Meditate on that the view that you have of yourself oftentimes does not necessarily match the view that other people have of you. And when you talk about perspective and you talk about the image of ourselves that we project onto ourselves, it is something that's medically recognized, right? So, good morning, Joseph. Thank you for joining us today. So if you talk about how our view of ourselves doesn't necessarily match how other people view us, setting aside, the Buddhist portion or the Buddhist approach to it, scientifically, medically speaking, it's also recognized. For example, things like body dysmorphic disorder, right? And I apologize if this is triggering for anyone. Body dysmorphic disorder is an extreme example of how we view ourselves. The view we have of ourselves does not match the view that others have of us. All right, so having brought that up, having talked about how we should realize that how we see ourselves very often is not how other people see us, that leads us on nicely to how we can deal with rejection. There is a sharing here from Gok Lian. Rejection has karma implications also. I actually rejected a job offer from MTC, Malaysian tobacco company that is now BAT, so British American Tobacco, if I'm not mistaken, in the year 1991. I didn't want to market cigarettes to destroy people's health. Later on, when I applied to another MNC company, they rejected me despite many rounds of interviews. My point is that we should just accept rejection and prepare for rejection later on, as the law of cause and effect works for every action we take. Right, so talking about that, that is a very good example of learning to accept rejection as a part of life, because we ourselves are not perfect, and in many situations we ourselves are not a perfect fit for something. And honestly, good on you. Kok Lian, this is a little personal opinion. I think very good on you for not having wanted to market cigarettes to destroy people's health and rejecting it. Like you said, there are karmic implications for being involved in an industry like that. Although there may be short-term gains or short-term benefits, there will be karmic implications for being involved in something like that. And if you guys are interested, I can share with you a very salient, very obvious example of how that has happened, and an incident that I was witness to. But anyway, that's not what today's talk is about. Today's talk is about rejection. So when we realize how we view ourselves oftentimes doesn't necessarily match how other people view us, that leads us on to how we can deal with rejection. So how can we deal with rejection? The first thing we can do is we can work by reframing rejection. So I've talked about this before, reframing incidents that happen to us so that we approach it in a more, with a different attitude or with a different perspective, which will help us to deal with it much more constructively. Instead of thinking about rejection as a statement of yourself or a statement of perhaps our lack of qualifications or our lack of ability or whatever, we can instead reframe rejection as, reframe it instead of being failure, and reframe it instead of being an answer. So oftentimes we think of rejection as failure, and we fear rejection because we fear failure, because if I'm rejected, it means I failed at something. And that then leads us to thinking, I don't want to try because I don't want to fail and I don't want to be rejected. So instead of thinking of it that way, you can instead reframe rejection as an answer. Because when you are rejected, what it means is that you tried something. At least you tried. And even if you tried, and even if it didn't work out, at least you tried, and at least you put in the effort to do it. It is better to get an answer to something than getting no answer at all. Because when you get no answer at all, it means that you stopped yourself before you even started. And this reminds me of a very famous quote that I read many years ago by a famous Canadian hockey player, Wayne Gretzky. I don't know anything about him beyond this quote and beyond the fact that he's very famous and he was extremely talented as an ice hockey player. But this quote was, "You miss 100% of the shots that you never take." And the reason why I like this quote is because that's very much our mentality most times, right? Is that we have such a fear of failure and we have such a fear of being rejected or being disappointed that before we even start something, we already stop. And so if you think about rejection in that way, if you think about rejection as an answer, it means that you actually tried. You tried to do something, and although it may not necessarily have worked out for the best, at least you tried and at least you got an answer. Then take the rejection or take the failure as a lesson, so that you can use that lesson to improve on your next attempt, so that you can actually one day succeed. So if, as they say, as the famous quote and adage goes, if you fail, try and try again, right? So one rejection should not stop us from trying again. And if rejection does stop us from trying again, what is going to happen is that we are going to be stuck, whether it's spiritually or whether it's secularly. There will be stagnation and there will be no growth if we accept rejection and we accept the first rejection. If you think about all the famous people in the world, or all the successful people in the world rather, how did they get success? Setting aside karma, if you look at how they approach rejection as an answer to an attempt to do something, and so they approach rejection as a learning opportunity. And that is precisely how Rinpoche taught us how to deal with rejection. During meetings, Rinpoche would ask us for our opinion, ask us for our thoughts, and for people who oftentimes manifested difficulties in dealing with rejection, Rinpoche would manifest rejection. So Rinpoche would question us again and again and again, and reject our ideas, reject our opinions. Sometimes Rinpoche would reject it would manifest very direct rejection. So Rinpoche would use words that were designed to make the rejection hurt. Oftentimes Rinpoche would be very gentle and very subtle with his rejection. It really depends on the person. But Rinpoche taught us to deal with rejection during meetings. Why? Because if we're trying to cultivate compassion, and if we're trying to cultivate and generate bodhicitta. When you are cultivating or trying to practice compassion and generating bodhicitta, you will face a lot of rejection. Not necessarily rejection that's intentional, so someone outright telling you no, they don't want your help, but sometimes also rejection as a result of karma, as a result of consequence. It's just a consequence that perhaps your attempts are not as well received because the person simply isn't ready for it. So Rinpoche was teaching us to deal with rejection, because in our practice, when we're trying to cultivate compassion and try to cultivate benefiting other sentient beings, we will experience a lot of rejection, and so we need to learn how to deal with it. And so why Rinpoche manifested rejection was to push us to keep trying. Because if you truly want to accomplish compassion, if you truly want to achieve and realize compassion and abide in bodhicitta, you always need to keep trying. A bodhisattva never stops trying to be of benefit to other people. And of course, because of the recipient's karma, invariably the bodhisattva will experience rejection. So how do you learn? You need to learn how to deal with rejection successfully if you're trying to cultivate compassion. All right? And that then leads us on to ways that we can deal with rejection, which is by cultivating compassion. So be compassionate in always be compassionate enough to keep thinking about others and to keep thinking about how to help other people all the time. Meditate on people's suffering and meditate on how you can be involved, or how we can be involved in taking away other people's suffering. And think about how much we don't like to suffer, and therefore others do not like to suffer too. All right, so maybe the other person didn't want to reject you, but they had to. Maybe they just simply weren't ready for our help at the time. Maybe it wasn't the right time for them. Maybe karmically speaking, they didn't have the karma to receive help. But try and try again, and keep trying, keep on trying. And by cultivating compassion, that helps you to deal with rejection is because when you realize that sometimes other people have no choice but to reject you, or you realize that sometimes other people reject you and it hurts, meditate on why you were trying to connect with them in the first place. If you're trying to connect with them in order to help them, by cultivating compassion, it helps you to look beyond the rejection. It helps you to look beyond, look into the future, to the next time, to the next opportunity you will have to help somebody. All right, and also think that, let's say in a secular situation, having compassion does help when you experience rejection. Having compassion does help you to deal with rejection. Why? Because maybe sometimes a person didn't have any choice but to reject you. So as a secular example, for example, let's say you went to apply for a new job and you got rejected. By cultivating compassion, instead of reacting angrily to the potential employer who just rejected you, cultivating compassion helps you to have a much more constructive approach, or a constructive attitude, or beneficial attitude towards the rejection, because it helps you to, for example, develop forgiveness. Maybe the person who rejected you had no choice to, because he knows that he's got to employ the boss's son. So the entire interview process is just a matter of formality to make it look like he's not engaging in nepotism. So cultivating compassion helps you to, for example, show forgiveness towards the potential would have been employer, and helps you to show forgiveness to them instead of reacting with anger, because maybe the person just didn't have a choice. We don't know what's going on elsewhere in other people's lives. All right. Another way that you can deal with rejection is that when you experience rejection, when you're a recipient of rejection, you can try to separate the rejection from you. And what do I mean by that? Think and meditate on the fact that the rejection is not a statement of who you inherently are. All right? And realize that the rejection is not about you. So, sometimes people, trying to keep mindful of the time this week so I don't overrun. But realize that rejection isn't necessarily a statement of you, and that sometimes rejection is not about you. Sometimes people reject your opinions. Sometimes people reject our decisions. Sometimes people reject our values. And sometimes people even reject our beliefs and so on. And that's fine. It's fine for people to do that. There is nothing wrong with people doing that. And that when they do that, it is not a statement of who we inherently are. First of all, yes, there's nothing wrong with people rejecting those things about us, because it doesn't mean that they reject us. And it doesn't mean that they ultimately reject a friendship or relationship with us. Realize that you are not your opinions, that you are not your decisions and so on. Why? Because we are always changing. We are always amending what we believe. We're always updating what we believe. We're always altering what we believe. What you believe now is not necessarily the same thing as what you believed 10 years ago. It's not necessarily the same thing that you believed when you were 5. What we believe, how we decide things, what opinions we hold, what values we have, they change over time. As and when we get more new information, as and when we learn new things. So, when people reject our opinions, when people reject what we have to say, when people reject what we express, when people reject our attempts, that is not necessarily who we are. They're not necessarily rejecting who we are. All right. I mean, from a very obviously Buddhist approach or Buddhist perspective, if you think about it, in your next life, in our next life, in my next life, we may not necessarily come back as human. We may come back as a dog. We may come back as a frog. We may come back as a spirit. We may be reborn in the hell realms. We may be reborn in the God realms and so on, or in the demigod realms. In those lifetimes, we will not have the same opinions that we hold now. We will not have the same beliefs that we hold now. We may not think in the same way that we do now. So when somebody rejects you now, it's a momentary rejection of that single instant of when you have held that opinion. All right. So when you are rejected, separate the rejection from you and think that the rejection isn't a statement about who you inherently are, because who you inherently are is not the opinion or not the decision that you've made or not the value that you hold. All right. And it's not always about you. So you can always think that. You can always think that the rejection that you experience is not always about you. Perhaps the girl who was rude to you this morning and who rejected you this morning already has a boyfriend and you just don't know about it. Maybe the boy who you've been eyeing for a while and has rejected, your flirtatious attempts. Maybe when he rejected you this morning, maybe his dog just died in the morning. You don't know about it. Maybe the company that didn't give you the interview already had hundreds of other applicants and they only had the budget to hire one person. So sometimes rejection that we experience isn't about us. So if you can think on that and if you can meditate on that, that will be one way that will help you to deal with rejection. And sometimes rejection that we experience can trigger rejection that we experience from someone else can trigger rejection of ourselves. All right, so rejection that we experience from someone else can make us think, I'm unworthy, I'm useless, I'm a disappointment, I don't deserve good things, and so on. And this actually reminds me of a teaching that Rinpoche gave on Vajrayogini, and something that Rinpoche had taught us on Vajrayogini. And Rinpoche had taught us that when we meditate when we do the Vajrayogini practice and we engage in the meditations, during part of the meditation, during part of the prayer, we are actually requesting for the Dakinis to recite on specific points of our places, of our body and on our wind channels. So what Rinpoche said was that it doesn't make sense for us to reject ourselves. It doesn't make sense for us to think of ourselves as not worthy and think of ourselves as useless and think of ourselves as disappointments or think of ourselves as dirty or undeserving or whatever when we engage in Vajrayogini practice or when we engage in the high tantras. It's illogical for us to think of ourselves as being so undeserving and so unworthy and then invite these enlightened energies to recite on specific points of our body. All right, so all of us are not at that stage yet. In that, I dare say that most of us watching this live stream have not received initiation yet. So since we are not there yet, how can we apply this teaching to our level, to ourselves at this level, since we are not engaging in these meditations where we are inviting enlightened energies to reside on specific points of our body? So just think, if you are doing your sadhana every day, which you should be, just think, what is it that we recite every single day? Every single day, we recite the refuge prayers. So we recite Namo Gurube, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya. Namo Gurube, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya. Namo Gurube, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya. Every single day. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. Right? So every single day, we recite these refuge prayers. And when we recite these refuge prayers, what does it really mean? Beyond it just meaning that we are taking refuge in the three jewels, actually, we are also taking refuge in our own Buddha potential. What do I mean by that? When you say that you take refuge in the Buddha, when you say that you take refuge in the Dharma, when you say you take refuge in the Sangha, you're also taking refuge in your own ability to become a Buddha. You take refuge in the Dharma because you take refuge in the fact that you can apply the Dharma in order to become enlightened. And so it doesn't make sense to every single day sit there and say, I take refuge in my Buddha potential, or in my potential to become enlightened, or in my potential to improve, while simultaneously saying, I reject my potential, I reject myself, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving of becoming enlightened. So those are two energies that don't mix. The energy of saying that I have the potential to become a Buddha if I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, versus saying, I'm not fast enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good looking enough. How can you be not smart enough? How can you be not good looking enough? How can you be not clever enough, and so on? But then you feel that the great goal of enlightenment is possible. Alright? So how can we take refuge in our Buddha nature and our potential to become enlightened when at the same time we reject ourselves? So Rinpoche many years ago gave a teaching on Shantideva. And Rinpoche gave a teaching on Shantideva's commentary on the mind. And very, very briefly, what Rinpoche talked about was that what Rinpoche explained is that our mind is like a river and constantly flowing. And so each time we say we can't, and each time we say we reject ourselves and we reject our abilities or reject our potential, what we're actually doing is we're throwing rocks in the river. And so as time passes and we keep saying I can't, and you paint or you imagine yourself to be somebody who is incapable, and you reject your potential, you reject your ability, you keep throwing rocks in the river. And what happens over time is that the river gets dammed up. So the flow of the river and the flow of the water gets broken, and the flow of our potential and our ability is broken off. It's dammed up. And so when we are with a guru and when we are training with a guru, what our guru is doing is our guru is pulling these rocks out of the river. Our guru is first of all training us not to throw rocks in the river, and also putting us in situations and giving us the opportunity to unblock the river so that our potential can continue to keep flowing. Our minds can continue to keep flowing. All right. So when we break up the flow of the river and we keep saying that we can't do something and we're not able to do something, and we reject our ability and we reject our potential, we are limiting ourselves. And we are limiting ourselves and our abilities, and we're giving in to our fears. And so being with a teacher, being with a guru, having this experience of training with a lama is uprooting and facing these fears so that our potential can flow again. Right? So how can the great goal of enlightenment be possible when, smaller things along the way are not? How can we every single day pray and believe that it's possible for us to become Buddhas when every step beforehand we believe it's not possible and we reject our own ability to engage in these things? All right, so I'm talking here about dealing with rejection of ourselves. How can we deal with rejection of ourselves? When we pray and when we do a sadhanas every single day, meditate on the fact that it is possible for us to become Buddhas, and hence if it's possible for us to become Buddhas, it is possible for us to succeed in so many other things beforehand. All right. So, for example, how is enlightenment possible? How is developing wisdom, how is developing compassion possible if we think that it's not possible for us to drive 45 minutes to Bentong to volunteer in the Relic Stupa project? All right, so that's my shout out to the all of the initiatives that are taking place as part of the Relic Stupa project. But yeah, if you want to deal with rejection of ourselves, as in we rejecting ourselves, do your sadhana every day. Because like I mentioned last week when I was talking about anxiety, should probably do more gangloma so my memory is better. But as I was talking last week about anxiety, I think doing a sadhana every single day has way more benefits beyond what we see in front of us in the paper, right? And so if we engage in our sadhanas every single day, and we engage in the meditations and the visualizations every single day, and we take our time, we don't rush it, and we properly do our sadhanas, not when we're sitting in traffic, or not when we have to pick up the kids from school, and not when our boss is rushing us for a project, but we actually take the time to do it properly and to do it nicely. There are more benefits to doing our sadhana than is initially set in front of us. And one such benefit is indirectly developing our own self-esteem and stopping this rejection of ourselves. All right? And, oh, by the way, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them, all right? I am almost done, surprisingly. Don't forget, when we do our sadhanas, it doesn't make sense for us to do our sadhanas and to, for example, recite the 4 immeasurables every single day when we are constantly rejecting other people. How can we pray for the welfare of all sentient beings when we are saying that, of our meditation cushions, we in actuality don't really care about the welfare of that sentient being because that sentient being said something that we didn't like, or that sentient being has an opinion that we don't agree with. All right, so don't forget, more so than just experiencing rejection, more so than just rejecting ourselves, we too also engage in the rejection of other people all the time. All right, I mean, just as an example, which Kok Lian very kindly shared with us, he rejected a job offer. So on a daily basis, we reject things too. Even famous Malaysian example, even when you go into a hawker store for lunch, right? And you're looking around to see what store you want to order from, you're still rejecting. Why? Because you're thinking, no, I don't want wanton mee. No, I don't want char kway teow. Well, I never say I don't want char kway teow, but no, I don't want wanton mee. I don't want, I don't know, tang hoon. I don't want fried rice. I don't want this. I don't want that. Oh, actually, I do want curry noodles or whatever, right? So on a daily basis, we ourselves are also engaging in rejection. So think, how do you deal with behavior that we ourselves engage in and we ourselves perform that is rejecting? When we reject someone, the next time you reject someone, please remember that when we reject people or when we reject other beings, normally when we reject them, we are rejecting them for very spurious and very man-made reasons. Whether we are rejecting someone based on a different socio-economic background, we are rejecting someone based on different culture, different religion, different politics. That's a very popular one these days. Or we're rejecting someone for holding different views. Why do I say these are man-made? Why do I say these are spurious? Because, like I mentioned before, our opinions are always changing. And they're man-made because if, let's say, you move to a different country or you put yourself in a different situation, your opinions of these things may change. The opinions that you have of homeless people, for example, now that everything seems to be okay, maybe one way, but then when we find ourselves homeless, we may have a different view of homelessness. So when we reject other people, think that normally when we reject people, we're doing so on very spurious and very man-made reasons. And that the one thing that we're rejecting them for is not a summation of their entire character or all of their qualities or their entire personality. All right, so the one thing that we're rejecting on may also be a result of their karma, a product of their karma, that they have been put in a certain situation to develop that kind of view or to develop that kind of behavior. And so when we reject someone, we're rejecting them based on it being a product of their karma, which does not make sense because we ourselves are a product of our own karma as well. All right. So meditate on how you feel when you're rejected and think, how do you feel? Does rejection suck? Does rejection hurt? And if rejection sucks and rejection hurts and we don't like rejection, then think, if I don't like feeling this way, is there a way that I can reject somebody else that doesn't leave them suffering, that does not create pain and further hurt for them, that does not trigger them to feel a certain way? All right. Then after you've thought about it and after you've meditated on that, then think, how can I do this in as kind a way as possible? All right. And remember, final point before I wrap up for today. So if you guys have any questions, please stick them in the comment section now. All right. But final point is that remember that happiness is within you. Happiness comes from the mind. Everything that we need to be happy is already within us, and we don't need external validation for happiness. Yes, acceptance feels good. Yes, rejection sucks. And yes, external validation does feel good. But it's nothing compared to the happiness that we can achieve when we realize it for ourselves. And when we realize that we don't need external validation to be happy, when rejection is okay. It's like what Rinpoche always says, right? Is that everything that is around us is a creation of our mind. Happiness is a creation of our mind. And so if happiness arises from the mind, what happens outside of you, whether it's rejection or whether it's acceptance, should not have an impact on our state of mind or on our well-being. So one way of dealing with rejection is by meditating on the fact that happiness comes from our mind, and how good we feel and how bad we feel arises from our mind. And so external rejection, external validation, external acceptance, and so on should not have an impact on our state of mind. Rejection and the feeling of being rejected is so common that most people don't stop to meditate and to think about how meaningless it is. They don't stop to think about how meaningless external validation is, and they also don't stop to think about how meaningless external rejection is. It's like what it's like what Rinpoche always said, right? Does someone else's praise pay our bills? What does someone else's praise do for us? Does someone else's praise or someone else's validation of us progress us or advance us spiritually? And conversely, what does someone else's rejection actually say about the real us? And the real us is the kind person. The real us is the spiritual person. The real us is the compassionate person. The real us is the person who makes our decisions and acts out of wisdom. What does someone else's rejection actually say about the real us? Does their rejection retract from our effort to cultivate kindness? Does their rejection retract from our effort to cultivate wisdom? Does their rejection detract from our efforts to cultivate compassion? Does their rejection detract from our efforts to practice Guru devotion? Does their rejection detract from our effort to uphold and to maintain our commitments and fulfill the instructions that we've been given from our Guru? What are they rejecting? So think, when someone rejects you, what are they actually rejecting? They are actually rejecting all of the impermanent parts of us that we can't take with us at the time of death. They are rejecting the parts of us that at the moment of death are ultimately meaningless. If somebody rejects you for your politics, if somebody rejects you for a job, if somebody rejects you when you ask them out, if somebody rejects you, from a relationship, from a friendship, think and meditate. All of those things, can you take them with you at the point of death? Does their rejection, therefore, detract from your spiritual practice? All right? So yeah, you got rejected from a job. A boy or a girl rejected you. You got rejected from a loan. Think, so what? So what? At the moment of death, are all of those instances, are all of those moments of rejection going to matter to you? Is that what you're going to be thinking about when you die? Or are you going to be thinking about where you're going to take rebirth? Are you going to be thinking about all the times that you help people? Are you going to be thinking about all the times when you alleviated someone else's suffering? All right, so when you experience rejection, remember that happiness comes from the mind. And remember that oftentimes what people are rejecting you for, or rejecting you from, ultimately at the point of death, at the moment of our passing, is meaningless. And it doesn't detract from all of the good things that we have done. It doesn't detract from all of the spiritual practice we have done. The rejection does not detract from all of the offerings that we have made. The rejection does not detract from all of the support that we've given to our guru. And the rejection does not detract from all of the times that we have practiced and engaged in guru devotion. All right? So when you feel down, and when you feel unhappy, or when you feel disappointed, when you've been rejected, final point, think that it is a sign that it's time for us to do more practice. Why? Because it is a sign that the 8 worldly concerns or the 8 worldly dharmas are still very, very strong in us. Specifically, being happy if praised and being unhappy if criticized. All right, so think, meditate. Why am I feeling rejected? Since I'm feeling rejected and I'm feeling this rejection so strongly, it is a clear sign that the 8 worldly dharmas is still very strong in me, and so there is some way more for me to practice. There is still some more way for me to go in terms of my practice, and so I need to put more effort and I need to engage more deeply in my spiritual practice. All right, so it goes back to the point that I originally made about dealing with rejection, which is reframing rejection, thinking of rejection as an answer as opposed to failure. All right, so 1 hour mark. I'm going to wrap up now, and before I wrap up, I'm gonna quickly stroll through. Okay, Kok Lian asked, sometimes when we are in a coffee shop and a man comes around to sell us lottery tickets, we reject as it's wrong to gamble. What do we do? I'm going to answer your question there, Kok Lian, with an example that Rinpoche himself showed us. Okay, first of all, if you feel that it's wrong to gamble, when you reject them, do it nicely. Because if you think about it, no matter what views that we hold about gambling or whatever, the gentleman, the person is still human. So I have seen oftentimes people rejecting, these guys who come around in hawker stalls trying to sell pens or even lottery tickets or whatever. And I've seen Malaysians like eating, and they do this, like they wave the guy very rudely away. And that's not nice. The person is still human, and even if they're doing something that you may not necessarily agree with, there's still a nice way to reject them. So just say no thank you. It's not for me. Because, I mean, despite the fact that I'm wearing white, despite the fact that my head is shaved, people still do try and sell me lottery tickets. So just tell them no thank you, not today. Sorry, I'm not interested. Just say it nicely. It doesn't cost us anything. Second thing is, I remember actually many instances when, like for example, when we were in Thailand, Rinpoche came across a woman who was in very, very bad physical condition. But she was still smiling and she was still very happy. And she was on the street and she was trying to make her living by selling lottery tickets. So if our view that yes, it is not good to gamble because there are consequences to gambling. But what did Rinpoche do? Rinpoche got his students to go and buy up all the lottery tickets from her. Every single one. Why did Rinpoche do that? I mean, it's wrong to gamble, right? Because when Rinpoche looked at her, Rinpoche said, in spite of the fact that she had so little and she was in such bad condition, she was smiling and she was happy and she was very positive. And Rinpoche felt that he needed to do something to help her. So Rinpoche very skillfully bought up all the lottery tickets, got us to buy up all the lottery tickets. Why? Number one, it would keep them away from the hands of people who have a gambling problem. Number two, it would give her a chance to rest for the rest of the day, because she has nothing else to sell, so she can go home. So Rinpoche bought up everything and, you know, had a nice conversation with her, and she was so happy. This woman was totally overjoyed. What did she do? She looked through whatever belongings she had, and she got out the things that were excuse me, the things that were clearly the most precious to her. She got out a bag and she filled it with stuff. She filled it with like a cassette, filled it with pens, filled it with a bunch of papers and things that were really precious to her. And excuse me, she gave it to Rinpoche in thanks for the kindness that Rinpoche had shown her. She gave it willingly, she gave it happily, and Rinpoche was extremely touched and extremely moved by it. And if I'm not mistaken, Rinpoche actually wrote a blog post about this woman's kindness and what this woman taught Rinpoche. So in answer to Kok Lian's question about, you know, people coming to sell lottery tickets and rejecting and all that, first of all, there's a way of rejecting someone in a nice way. Second of all, it's also a case of observing and seeing what skillful actions we can engage in, which will be most beneficial. So yeah, you know, if the person looks healthy, if the person looks well fed, if the person doesn't look like they're, you know, physically in any trouble and so on, reject them, but do it nicely. I mean, most people, a lot of, yeah, that's the thing. I've actually, you know, confronted people for this before, when they wave vendors away very rudely. Reject them nicely. But, you know, oftentimes if you see someone who's doing very, very, very badly, 5 ringgit, 10 ringgit, 20 ringgit, whatever, isn't going to be the end of the world for us, but it may mean a lot to someone else. I'm not saying that I'm not condoning gambling, by the way. I'm just saying that we look at the situation, we weigh up the benefit versus the disbenefit. If the benefit of the action is much, much greater, although outwardly it may look wrong for us to do so, if the benefit to the person is greater, then it still behooves us to engage in it. Is it wrong to gamble? Okay, let me answer this by giving you another example, which is the example of the Genze Chapel. People go to the Genze Chapel at the front of Kechara Forest Retreat, and they go there to pray for 4D. They go there to pray to win the lottery. They go there to pray for a windfall. Is their motivation the highest motivation that they can have? No, it is not the highest motivation that there exists that they can have, but it is a way for them to connect with an enlightened being. So oftentimes what you'll see happen is that, you know, people will go to the Genze Chapel, they will write down their 4D number on paper, and then they'll put it at Genze's feet and ask Genze to bless them. Now what happens actually as a result of that is, when people do win the lottery, they usually come back, and they come back to say thank you to Genze, and they come back and they make a donation. Like I said, is it the best motivation that they can have? No, it's not the highest motivation that one can have, but it does help them to make a connection to an enlightened being. So if you are very, very concerned about the potential negative consequences that may arise as a result of helping someone by buying them a lottery ticket, if you do win, what you can do is use the money for good cause. Donate the money somewhere that will do something good with the money, and then dedicate it to the person that you bought the lottery ticket from. Help them that way to make a connection to something that is good for their future lives. Maybe it's something that they cannot necessarily engage in this life, but it creates merit, it creates karma that will come to fruition in a future life. So what can you do? Oh, good morning, Mandy. Long time no see. Yeah, Kok Lian, exactly. On numerous occasions, buy out of the pure motivation to help them. And then if you do win, donate the money somewhere and then dedicate it to the men. Make offerings on the guy's behalf, on the person's behalf. Or if you are not in a position to do so that day, just tell them nicely that it's not for you, that you're not interested. Sorry, you're not interested. This doesn't just apply to people who are selling lottery tickets, by the way. It's something that Rimchi taught us to do, especially for mothers with children. Whenever Rimchi saw mothers with children selling things like, keropok, like crackers and stuff, or like pens or tissue paper or whatever, Rinpoche would get us to buy up everything. And then Rinpoche will make an additional donation to them on top of making the purchase. Why? So they can go home early and rest for the day, and so that they don't have to worry that day for their child. And then Rinpoche will give out, whatever it is that Rinpoche had just purchased to his students or whatever. Or Rinpoche will use it to make offerings on the altar and then dedicate the merit of that to the vendor. All right, so that is something that you can do as well. Okay, that is it from me for today. Before I go, think about moments in the past week where you have experienced rejection. Think about moments in the past week where you have performed an act of rejection. And think about moments in the past week when you have rejected yourself. All right. Kok Lian already shared with us one example of his experience way back in 1991 with the tobacco company. But for the rest of us, we can meditate on rejection that we've experienced in the past week, and meditate on how we felt, and how we reacted, and what further actions arose as a result of our reaction to that rejection. Did those actions create further positive karma for us, or further negative karma for us to experience more rejection in the future? All right. And as you go into this next week, if you happen to be eating at a coffee shop and a vendor approaches you, number one, please social distance. Number two, please wear your mask. And number three, if a vendor does come up to you and approach you during this week, think about how you may reject the person, or how you may interact with the person in a way that doesn't create more suffering for them. If you get rejected for a project that you are gunning for this week, think about how you can react to it in a way that creates karma that doesn't cause us to experience more rejection in the future. Think about how we can react in a way that may actually lead to more benefit, because it is possible for us to experience rejection or to reject things, and then for that experience to lead to greater benefit or to more constructive results, right? So think about that as you move into the new week, I think for most of us, that rejection may come in the form of asking people to wear masks, right? So asking people to wear masks and then saying, oh no, I don't need to wear a mask. I think that will be the most common rejection that most of us will experience this week. But yes, as we move into this week, think about how we're going to deal with rejection when we come across it. All right. Reminder before I go, upcoming programs. There is the Doji Shukden prayer at 2 p.m. today on the Chinese Kechara Facebook page, as well as Pastor Albert's live sharing at 3 p.m. And then on Tuesday at 8 p.m. there is the Sam Rinpoche Swift Return Puja on the Kechara Facebook page, and at 9:30 p.m. Easy Dharma for the New Normal by Pastor David, sharing, I believe, on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. All right, so that's happening this week. Thank you guys very much for joining me today. If you have any requests for prayers or for offerings to be made, please leave me a comment below this video, and that will be done for you. And don't forget to do your dedications. After this stream has ended, I will do my dedications separately. And once again, I wish to thank our sponsors who made today's talk possible. and your support helps us to keep making these programs available for everyone. So if you would like to donate, there is a link in the description section of this video, so do click on it, and yeah, you can do everything there. All right, thank you guys so much for joining me. I believe this is week 10, so thank you for joining me for 10 weeks, and I will see you guys same time, same place next week, 10 a.m. right here on the Kechara Facebook page. Thank you guys, have a great week ahead, and see you all. Bye.